For anyone who follows me on Letterboxd, you may know that I've recently been on a sort of binge fest when it comes to the filmography of anime director Makoto Shinkai, the man responsible for some of the most successful anime films in Japan, such as 5 centimeters per second, The Garden of Words, Weathering with You, and of course, Your Name. Shinkai is easily one of the more interesting and talented directors working in not just the anime industry, but within the realm of animation in general. Now, I realize that this isn't a controversial or unpopular opinion to have. I mean, just look at all these fucking numbers to back me up on this. So I'm not interested in exploring the success his films have garnered or whether Shinkai will be the next Miyazaki or anything like that. Instead, I'm more interested in analyzing what Shinkai's films have to say about one particular topic: love. If you look at Shinkai's entire filmography, all of his films are in some way about love, whether it be star-crossed lovers that are determined to be together through time and space, former lovers who must learn to get over what could have been and move on, or just two random strangers who just learn to love and support one another. However, to just stop my analysis right there, it would not only make for a short video, mind you, but also a very shallow, surface-level analysis of Shinkai's work, because I think what this man has to say about love and what we can take away from his movies about love require much further digging than that. Yes, all of Shinkai's movies are about people in love, livey, cutesy, lovey-dovey romances, but what Shinkai has to say about the subject of romance is far deeper and more complex than that, and that's exactly what I'm interested in exploring. Now, for some context, if you look at my top 4 favorite films on Letterboxd, then you probably understand that, on paper, the types of stories that Shinkai tells should realistically not be my thing. While I do consider myself a weeb, these high school romance kawaii movies are generally the last sort of anime I'd watch, much less be into. Hell, I don't even like romance films in general. Unless they're made by these people, you need to get this bullshit out of my face. And yet, despite all these biases that I have, the fact that I've grown to love pretty much everything that this man has made says a lot about not just the stories he tells, but the way he tells them. But why, though? Why have these love stories that Makoto Shinkai has told in his films managed to speak to me that very few romance films have? What about Shinkai's filmography stands out from the generic bullshit of romance stories? I think if we look at Shinkai's filmography from a big picture perspective, then the answer is a lot simpler than I think we realize. The reason why many people, especially myself, love Shinkai's work is because, in the end, his films are not love stories, they are stories about love. Now, for anyone confused, you might think that these are the exact same ideas and that I'm just being a pretentious prick. Which I guess you may be right, but hear me out. While these sound like the same thing, they really aren't, and I think if you compare how Shinkai explores the subject of love compared to any other generic bullshit rom-com, you can see just how different these statements are. So, for the sake of argument, let's pick a random rom-com to analyze. So let's say, this one. For anyone unfamiliar with the film, Longshot follows Charlize Theron playing a US Senator turned presidential candidate, and Seth Rogen playing Seth Rogen, let's be real, pretending to be a journalist, who meet at a party. Charlize Theron hires Seth Rogen to be a speechwriter. They travel across the world, blah, 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 blah. They learn to fall in love, etc., etc., etc. Accept people for who they are, don't be what society wants them to be, generic rom-com stuff. Pretty simple, right? And the reason why it does sound pretty simple is because, like I mentioned, this is just generic rom-com bullshit. It has everything a rom-com should technically have. Two people getting into a meet cute and realizing they have a connection. Something happens in the plot that causes them to run into each other and be in their lives more often. They learn more things about each other before eventually falling in love. Then something happens in the plot that causes them to drift apart, and suddenly the movie becomes a serious drama for the last third of the movie before eventually learning to overcome the conflict and learn to love one another forever and ever and happily ever after. Now, structurally, this is the plot of every rom-com, not just Longshot, and while by no means does that make a rom-com bad, I mean, everyone has their guilty pleasures, let's be real, it kind of goes to show how cliched and limited this sort of storytelling can be. While yes, it can be cute and even heartwarming at times for person A to learn that he or she deserves to be with person B, or that persons A and B deserve to be together despite everything they go through, or whatever the conflict is, that's all fine in games, but unfortunately, because these kinds of movies are very limited to what they are, and whatever tropes/cliches exist within the rom-com world, the most they can ever be are cutesy love stories. And once again, there's nothing wrong with a movie just being a cutesy love story. If that's your thing, congrats. But for me, I kind of need more than that. And this is where the whole division between love stories and stories about love come to play, because I think what ultimately separates the two is not only how both kind of movies approach romance, but what both kind of movies ultimately say about romance as a whole. Love stories don't really say much about the topic of love other than and these people are cute together, they should meet and fall in love or whatever. They are very surface level approaches to the subject of romance, and because of that they don't have much to say about the concept of love as a whole. Stories about love, on the other hand, go beyond just the simple meet cute story. These kinds of movies go beyond the surface level bullshit and go out of their way to actually say something profound and meaningful and unique about the subject. However, while the love story rom-coms are definitely easy to identify, stories about love are a bit more difficult to pin down because in many ways these kinds of movies have similar story structures and tropes as the love story rom-coms. Unless the film intends to use the familiar tropes and cliches to either twist them into something unexpected like Eternal Sunshine, or use them to make a point or statement about a particular topic or subject like Her, then it's kind of difficult to really identify stories about love. This is where we have to turn our brains on and honestly just put on our analytical hats, because to identify whether a film is a love story or a story about love, we have to dig deeper beyond what we are shown. For example, a movie that I would call a story about love would be something like Palm Springs, a 2020 rom-com starring the mom from How I Met Your Mother and Jake Peralta from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. On the surface, it seems like Groundhog Day, just except in California or wherever it takes place. However, if you pay attention to what the film has to say about the subject of love, particularly when considering the themes of nihilism, cynicism, and hope, and apply them to this story about love stuck in a time loop, then the film not only becomes much more complex, but has much more to say than just person A and person B hooked up and banged. Palm Springs goes beyond just a love story and uses this concept of a Groundhog Day style time loop to actually say something about the concept of love in a meaningful way. With that in mind, let's return to this video's original subject matter, Makoto Shinkai. Shinkai has, in my opinion, become the master of telling stories about love, because like what Palm Springs did, he's less interested in telling a cutesy romance story and more interested in exploring the concept of love and how we can apply it to our everyday lives. And I know that's kind of weird to hear, since this is the same director who has included shit like body swapping and Jesus praying magic weather, but let me explain. For example, let's start with Shinkai's most popular film, Your Name. Now, before I go on, spoilers for all these movies, so while I won't be going in depth about any major plot points or anything like that, I'll still talk about some things that could be considered spoilery, so if you haven't seen any of these movies, I recommend you stop this video and watch them before coming back. You've been warned. Anyway, in Your Name, the film explores the lives of two high school students. One is a boy named Taki, who lives in the heart of Tokyo, and a girl named Mitsuo, who lives in the Japanese countryside. And at some point, both of these characters switch bodies because reasons, and while this phenomenon is going on, they not only learn more about each other, but also how much they grow because of the special connection they have. While the concept of body swapping is not really unique, the way the film utilizes this idea in building a romance is what makes the film interesting. The characters learn to fall in love despite never really meeting until near the end of the film, and yet not once does it feel unjustified. Sure, it can feel corny or cheesy, but I can take corny and cheesy any day as long as the intended effect is not only realized but effective within the context of the film. Both Taki and Mitsuo realize that they are meant for each other. For Mitsuo, it's when she cries in front of the mirror while getting ready for school, and for Taki, it's when he goes on his date with the girl he thought he was in love with. They have this empty hole in their lives, which is why at some point they both go out of their way to find their other self, no matter how long or arduous the journey may be. Unfortunately, life is never that simple, because despite Taki and Mitsuo wanting to be with one another, they are unfortunately faced with conflicts that are beyond their control. Whether it be a fucking cataclysmic, city-shattering fucking comet, or simply because the process of body swapping causes them to lose their memories and not remembering each other's names, there's always something that prevents Taki and Mitsuo from being together. And yet, in spite of all these challenges, they hold out hope. One of my favorite scenes in the entire film is without a doubt the mountain scene where Taki and Mitsuo meet for the first time. This is such an incredibly powerful moment because not only has the film built up to this very scene and the way they pour their entire heart out, the way that they're able to just cry and laugh and tease each other like there's nothing to worry about, it really tears up my heartstrings, not gonna lie. And it's all the more poignant considering that the comet is still coming to blow up the entire town. And despite saving the town, it still doesn't prevent Taki and Mitsuo from losing their memories. And in a dark romance film like Eternal Sunshine, the film would normally end there. But Shinkai isn't Charlie Kaufman. He keeps the film going. We witness what their lives have become since this event, and yet it's obvious that they're still longing for something, someone to fill the gaps in their holes. So when they see each other for the first time in God knows how long, they feel an emotional connection. Despite having their memories erased, they still feel like they know each other in some way, which is why when they meet each other again for the first time, it's incredibly powerful considering everything that has led up to that moment. When they cry in tears of joy, you feel the exact same way, because as cheesy as it may sound, love kind of gets you that way. The message that Shinkai is clearly tackling with Your Name is that love transcends time and space. And what that means is that if there's someone out there who you feel like you have a connection with, like you have that kind of spark that you don't have with anyone else, and that person feels the exact same way, then according to Shinkai, that feeling is just something you can't let go. Love finds a way. If two people know they are meant for each other, whether they know or not, then the two lovers will eventually find each other, regardless of what challenges and struggles they face. That, in my opinion, is just fucking beautiful. And it's also a very emotional yet complex way of exploring love, which is why I've come to consider Your Name to be one of my favorite films of all time. However, this message isn't only limited to Your Name, as this sort of angle on love is something that Shinkai tackles in his other film. For example, in Weathering with You, Shinkai takes a very similar approach to love by exploring the relationship between Hodaka and Hina. Both Hodaka and Hina are runaways attempting to make something of themselves and discover who they are in the heart of Tokyo. They form a weather-changing business after Hodaka learns of Hina's ability to basically be Jesus Christ Superstar, and while it starts out as something professional, eventually turns into something more romantic as Hodaka and Hina start developing feelings for each other, to the point that Hodaka spends 3 hours looking for the perfect ring to buy for Hina. Jesus Christ. How much time do people spend 3 hours doing anything? Anyway, however, like with Taki and Mitsuo, the two lovers face a conflict beyond their control, which is that Hina is forced to be sacrificed as a sunshine girl to not only bring sunshine back to Japan, but to also prevent the country as a whole from flooding. Hina goes through with this at first, but this is something that Hodaka can't accept, so he does everything he can to see Hina one last time, to the point where he's actively escaping from the police and firing fucking pistol shots at them. Like with Your Name, all of this on paper sounds incredibly cheesy and Lifetime movie, but in many ways you can interpret the film as that. But I think it's still incredibly effective in terms of what Shinkai is trying to achieve with the context of the film. When Hodaka and Hina reunite in this spiritual, heaven-like realm, and Hodaka confesses that he doesn't care if he never sees the sun again as long as he gets to see her every day, it feels so heartfelt and emotional considering not only how we got to this moment, but the individual struggles that each character had to face. This confession and the meaning in general doesn't feel cheesy or bullshit because we've seen how much these characters have grown and struggled against. They're runaways who dream of finding something, anything, that can make them feel complete, because they know deep down that they won't find it at the places that they came from. They've struggled through everything, from dealing with shady gangsters to police officers forcing them into certain situations that causes them to feel restrictive and unfree, and it's only when they are together do they feel completely whole. You could argue that what Hodaka and Hina did was selfish, but with everything that these kids had to go through, can you really blame them? If you knew your soulmate, the person that truly made you complete, was no longer on the planet Earth, would you really be okay with never seeing them again? This is a very gray situation, and yet Hodaka still makes the choice to sacrifice the planet to be with Hina, not just for the sake of a silly romance, but because the world has never given a damn about any of them, and so they are doing what's best for them, not what's best for everyone else. This idea of love transcending time and space and how it can overcome any challenge that life may throw at you is a very sweet yet powerful take on the concept of love. It may sound cheesy, but considering how intelligently Shinkai's films have tackled these subjects, it's crazy how most rom-coms out there have rarely gone to depths that's as deep as this. However, some of you may argue, but Timmy, those are romances with unrealistic story elements of sci-fi and fantasy. How the hell are we supposed to take away these deep concepts of love when stories themselves are not very realistic? Okay, firstly, this counter-argument is bullshit because I feel like if a message is interpretable in a way that anyone can take something away from it, then who really gives a fuck what genre it is? But if you're still not convinced, then I have 2 more Shinkai films that I can show you that explore love from an equally deep perspective, but is much more grounded in reality. 5 centimeters per second and The Garden of Words. Like I mentioned before, 5 centimeters per second and The Garden of Words stand out from the rest of Shinkai's filmography, as these movies lack any sort of fantastical or science fiction element that is commonplace in his other films. However, the differences don't stop there, as these are not only much shorter movies than something like Your Name and Weathering with You, but they also explore the concept of love transcending time and space from a much different angle than those movies. I originally was going to use the word pessimistic, but I don't think that's the right word to describe the feeling Shinkai uses in 5 centimeters and Garden of Words, but I don't think more grounded is the right term either. I don't know, I'll let you guys decide for yourself, but the point is that even without any fantastical element, Shinkai is still incredibly capable of making you think about your preconceived notions of love, especially love in film. For example, in 5 centimeters per second, the film is told in 3 episodes, and each of these episodes explore the character of Takaki and his relationship with Akari. In episode 1 of the film, Shinkai showcases them from a very young age, and a very close one at that, to the point that the two are actively sending letters to each other when they're talking about their hopes, their dreams, and especially their love for each other. And after the two move apart due to their parents making them go to different schools, it creates this tension. It makes the relationship that they used to have much difficult. In the first episode, we follow Takaki going through what feels like hell as his planned trip to meet Akari go through every turn for the worse, whether it be the freezing blizzard slowing down the train, the constant delays the train faces because of these snowstorms, the lack of communication to let Akari know that he'll be late. Basically, fucking shit hits the fan, and everything is just being turned for the worse. Anyway, TLDR, Takaki goes through a bunch of bullshit, and yet despite all that, Akari and Takaki finally meet, share food with each other, and share a warm, loving kiss with each other. And it's really sweet, and in any other romance movie, the film would end right here, but unfortunately, like life, it can't end there. So Takaki loses the letter that he was going to give to Akari, and Akari doesn't give the letter that she was going to give to Takaki, because they both realize that despite how much they love each other, they know that they can't keep this up forever. Their love for each other, no matter how strong it may be, can't continue to sustain if they have to continue living like this. They learn that they must let each other go, but unfortunately this has different effects on the characters. Throughout episodes 2 and 3, we see how this breakup is affecting the characters. While Akari seems to have successfully moved on as she finds a new boyfriend who she eventually agrees to marry, Takaki on the other hand can't seem to let go. Throughout episode 2, even though there is a cute waifu waiting for him and ready to confess her feelings for, he can't really bring himself to accept her because he's still hung over by what could have been with Akari. He can't bring himself to love another girl or even live life in general because Takaki believes that he lost his soulmate, his other half, forever, and if he can't have the one thing he desires, then what's the point? There is something that is further explored in episode 3 where we see Takaki technically having everything, a girlfriend, a job, an apartment, etc., and yet he's still not happy. He feels empty, which is why you see the character break up with his girlfriend, quit his job, and frequent the bar at night. It's not until when Takaki and Akari quote-unquote meet for the last time does Takaki realize that he needs to learn to let go. When they do what I like to call the classic Shinkai turnaround after pausing moment, a train goes by them, and while Takaki waits for the train to leave, Akari has already left. We are deprived of this potential union, and yet it's the best case scenario for Takaki. He leaves with a smile on his face because he can finally move on with his life. He can finally learn to live and stop living in the past, and I think in the age of the pandemic, we kind of need that more than ever. So like I said, this is definitely a more grounded approach to the idea of love than Your Name or Weathering with You, but they still fall under the same umbrella that Shinkai has created, that being the concept of love transcending time and space. Granted, they are different in that Your Name and Weathering with You sees the characters end in a happy note, while the characters of 5 centimeters end on a more bittersweet note. I think they still more or less tackle the same concept of love. To me, I see them as two sides of the same coin. They may end in different outcomes, but they still end in the same way. The characters learning to be happy with themselves. Love is not just something that we give to others, but something we give to ourselves, which leads me to my last Shinkai film, Garden of Words. Now, out of all the films that I've talked about in this video, The Garden of Words is without a doubt the most unique one out of Shinkai's filmography, as this is the only one without star-crossed lovers, or romance in general. Well, this is definitely because of that fucking huge age difference between our two protagonists, Takao and Yukino. I mean, we're talking like Paul Thomas Anderson, Licorice Pizza, style age difference, but this is also because the film is more interested in love for oneself than any sort of romantic tale that this story could potentially / creepily have explored. Throughout the film, Takao and Yukino are afflicted by their own issues of depression and mental health. Takao dreams of being a shoemaker, but is burdened by the fact that he not only believes that he's not good enough to pursue this passion, but he also leads a very uncomfortable life of having to go to school despite having no passion for what he studies, or working part-time to barely make ends meet. Similarly, Yukino is a teacher at Takao's high school who enjoys literature and poetry, but is burdened with depression and anxiety because of a nasty rumor that was spread about her quote-unquote seducing a student's boyfriend. Both individuals are bogged down by their inner and outer demons to the point that they willingly choose to skip work / school whenever it rains in the morning and go sit in the park, which is where the two meet for the first time. They're nothing but strangers to each other, but they talk and open up to each other. They start to learn more about each other to the point where they actively encourage each other to be the best versions of themselves. This ranges from big things like Yukino buying a book on shoes for Takao to little things like changing Yukino's diet from chocolate and beer to coffee and actual fucking food. Both are actively supporting each other despite knowing very little about one another, and the ultimate culmination of this relationship reaches to that iconic scene in the rain in which Takao and Yukino cry in each other's arms. They both reach their lowest point, to the point where they start breaking down crying, but just like how the sun eventually comes around after a heavy storm, no matter how dark the lowest point may be, you'll eventually reach the light towards the end of the tunnel. Garden of Words isn't a romance the same way that 5 centimeters Weathering with You and Your Name are, but it's still a story about love, but a very specific type of love, that being that love we have for each other. The characters in the Garden of Words attempt to find a sense of fulfillment and meaning in their otherwise cruel and depressing lives. They have all these moments of doubt, they all think they're not good enough or they don't deserve to be happy in any sense of the world, but as Shinkai points out, that's bullshit. We all deserve to be happy, we all deserve to be loved, we deserve to love ourselves, because in the end, our happiness is more important than anything else, and Shinkai's characters probably know this better than anyone else. This is what I've grown to love about Makoto Shinkai and his approach to love and storytelling. Love transcends space and time, and it can conquer any obstacle we come across, but love isn't defined by just two people who love each other, it's about reaching that ultimate sense of happiness. Love is ultimately whatever the fuck we want it to be, and we express it in ways that aren't defined by genre cliches and tropes, and I think Shinkai understands this better than most of these rom-com directors. If you know that you and another person are meant to be together, then you should go out and be with that person no matter what. While at times destiny and fate may be on your side during these intimate moments of romance, unfortunately, other times destiny and fate may be against you, and it's up to you on how you pick yourself back up and on your feet. Because in the end, love shouldn't just be about expressing romance and intimacy with another person, it should be about the love we have for each other. It doesn't matter if we get the person of our dreams or not, because if we don't have love for ourselves, then how do we expect our soulmate to give us the love that we deserve?
ああこのまま僕たちの声が世界の端っこまで消え